Well, good morning and welcome to our video today. My name is Peter Frank, and I am the manager of Concordia Technology Solutions. We've been going on for these live videos for most of the year, and it's going really well. We've got a returning guest today to talk about social media ideas for Lent, and this is part two. We've had some before. We'll talk about that in just a second. So let me make sure I've got him on. Daniel, are you there?
Hey, I'm here. How are you, Peter?
Good, Daniel. Thanks for joining me again today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Well, Daniel is pastor at Christ Lutheran Church in Topeka, Kansas. He is a regular blogger for us on the CTS Technology in Your Ministry blog, and we've had you on for a couple of videos now. I know we talked about church management software several weeks back, so thanks for joining us again. And today we are talking about social media ideas for Lent, part 2. So we call it part 2 because last year you wrote a blog post for us for Lent and six Lent social media campaigns ideas. Let me get that on the screen here. Do you want to talk a little bit about this blog post before we get into the new one, and just kind of your thoughts behind that? Which of these ideas you've used before?
Yeah, it was just a way to help people kind of come up with ideas or see what people have done to engage their members of the community in social media during the season of Lent. And some of the things that I've done here, I've done the pick a day meditation, and that requires some planning because that requires you to kind of come up with a calendar, and you can either publicize the calendar so everybody sees it, or you put out whatever the theme is or the word is of the day on that. And so you don't want to just sit there and try to come up with something 5 minutes beforehand, because you'd be surprised about how hard it is to come up with 40 things or 46 things if you do Sundays. The advertise the services, we do that. I've done the share the theme, the sharing of the sermon. That's probably the easiest one, because it's just asking the pastor to copy and paste their sermon onto a blog page on the church's website. And I mean, that might call for some cleaning up of it, because usually we speak in contractions, whereas reading contractions is not the best. So you might have to do some editing on that. And then the sharing of the daily prayer, that's one that I have seen. I've not personally done as much, or it's more of, if there's been a national tragedy, something like that, we've shared, my church has shared a prayer through Facebook and Instagram for addressing that, and then just, going to our Lord in prayer. The online fast, again, that's one that I've seen people do. That's a lot harder for, I think, church workers to do, because it's not like we can just turn our phone off for an hour each day, because you never know when somebody might wind up in the hospital or some other emergency, and they're trying to get a hold of the pastor or the DCE. So that's one that I kind of sometimes wish I could do, but it's a little bit harder to do. And so some of these are just really simple. Some take more planning and just kind of showing just a tip of the iceberg, so to speak, of what was possible there.
Well, and things in social media have changed since then. We've got some new opportunities, and as churches have become more accustomed to being creative on social media, other things have come up, and so that's why when we talked about blog post ideas, like, well, let's see if we can get a part 2 in there, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So we had some audio issues. I think we had them solved. They were on my end where I was echoing, so hopefully that's okay. I think, according to my communication with my team, we're looking okay. So if I stop you at all, Daniel, that's why. But all right, let's talk a little bit about social media ideas for Lent, part 2. Now, this blog post just came out this past week, and actually it's on Tuesday. And we're going to go in through these one by one, but I think we'll start here with just right at the top and go to the share a weekly video message. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this one here and what's involved with that?
So this one can be either very simple and off the cuff, or it can be very planned out. And not a lot of the options are like that. They're usually one or the other. But to share the video, I believe we have video of a pastor, actually a classmate of mine, Pastor Antor, Donald Antor, where he just gets on Instagram, does a short 2-minute devotional, just kind of something going on. And so it can be like that, and you can include other people, or it can be a little bit more planned out. You sit down, you have a script, so to speak, you have topics that you want to hit or talk about. And the other part of this is, and why I started out with the video message, is that it can be incorporated in all the other ideas that I have. And so that would be a little bit more planned out, obviously, because you want those things to coincide. One thing is because of the nature of video and people online, and when uh, obviously people are working, and church workers tend to have office hours in the middle of the day, and our members tend to be at school or in the office in the middle of the day also. If you do it at like 2 p.m. on a Monday, you might only get 5 people that watch it live, but that doesn't mean, as people get home or throughout the week, they won't be able to watch it. And so instant interaction isn't necessarily the goal here, as more as here's a message and you can direct people to it. And it's up there for a week or Instagram all time,
Yeah.
so to speak.
I'm going to try to play that video from Don when we were testing it before. Yesterday it worked fine, and today it didn't work at all. So at the very least, we can show the video portion, maybe not the audio, just to get an idea of that. And what you said about it staying up there for a while, this is one that he had done for right before Advent. And so here's hoping that the sound works, but if not, we'll play the video just very briefly. All right, I'm thinking that the sound wasn't coming across there. Did you hear anything, Daniel?
I did not hear anything,
Oh, that's too
unfortunately.
bad. All right, well, we'll figure that out next time. I was talking with Don yesterday about making sure we could use it. He agreed to come on in a few weeks, so we'll be talking to Don more about how he uses video on a regular basis. But yeah, like you said, it lasts there for a while, and that point about timing, I think, is especially important too. Understand when your audience is on social media. So, is this something that you have tested out yet?
It's not something that I have personally done. Just I like to plan things a little bit more, and don't necessarily. If I just do it off the cuff, I could forget it for a couple of days, and I don't want to do that if I'm trying to do something consistently. But just about everybody has a smartphone, and that's all you really need. You don't need a $3,000 camera. You can set up, obviously, you can set up a vlogging rig for under $1,000, but you don't need that. You just need a phone is all you need. So it's one of those things that can be very, very simple, or it can be as in-depth as you want. But I think one thing that I pointed out, this is different than filming the sermon given on a Sunday and just putting it on there. This is something that is extra from that.
Good. All right, well, let's move into our second one, and I know this one has a lot of variety to it as well, but hosting an online study. Talk to us about that and how, especially within Lent, this could become important.
So Lent is a time when Christians, especially Lutherans, tend to take their faith a little bit more seriously. And along with a fast, many people also kind of add something, and that tends to be a devotion. And so it's a great time to do a special study. The problem is that schedules are busy, and so trying to sit there and figure out a time or day to do that with people, all together in one room might be a little difficult. And so a way around that is to do that same study, but do it online through social media. And Facebook and Twitter both lend themselves as platforms very easy to do this with. Facebook, you can do it as a group, and so the discussion there with the group, the benefit is that the discussion on the study material can go throughout the week and just kind of keep on rolling as people check into Facebook and see their notifications and kind of see. And so you can put the source material out there, or if it's a video, you can post the video to the group, or even the whole the Facebook page for the church. Or if you have small groups within your congregation and they have group pages, you can do it as a church-wide thing that way, or you can just do it for, hey, if you want to be a part of this, join this group, and we'll go from there. Twitter won't lend itself as much to all the interaction simply because you're limited by 280 characters, and so that can be a little bit harder. And so that would be more of maybe posting a link to the source material, or saying, for study, read John 1:1 through 1:14, right? Or read John 1 through 4. You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying.
Chapter 1, verses 1 through 14. Okay, and so real quick, and then you kind of just tweet as you read, or with this verse, some leading questions that you'd want people to think about and discuss with. But because you can't post as much with the conversation, it's just harder to kind of follow along in Twitter, especially as people reply to individual tweets. It's not going to be so much as a discussion with interactions where you're necessarily responding to all the responses, so much as it's a guided study, as you're saying, okay, do this and consider these questions. But it's still a way for churches to lead that study, or offer that study, because what I find out with talking with people is, Pastor, I want to do a devotion, but there's so much out there. They're just overwhelmed with options, right? If you have too many choices, it's really hard to pick. That's why nobody can figure out what restaurant they want to go to, because there's too many choices. Where do you want to go? I don't know. And then you start listing off the places people don't want to go to, right? So this is just a way to help people with that. Say, oh, okay, you want to do a study? We're going to be doing this through Lent, and invite them to participate that way.
Well, and I think having on social media too is that regular reminders. Sure, you could hand out a devotional book to every member of your congregation, and I know a place that sells those if you're interested. But
Portals of Prayer.
That's right. Well, and even Lenten devotions, we put out a new one every year. But I know for me personally, reading something takes that extra effort of remembering to pick it up and sit down and read it, whereas I'm on my phone constantly. And so if it's on Facebook or it's on Twitter, it's that regular reminder, and seeing that community around reading through this or going through the same study is, I personally think that could help people stay more engaged in the Word than just having the devotion book with it, even if they're tied together.
And well, one of the other things about this is that you can tie it with, if you're doing a theme, whether on Sundays or midweeks, you can tie this devotion into that theme also. That would probably require you to do a lot more of the writing than if necessarily picking something up. But that kind of similar conversation going on, leading a whole church kind of going through one thing, is special, I think, and it really reinforces that the church is a community. It's not just a place of cats, kind of individuals just getting together, but it's a place where we gather in the name of the Lord and we receive His forgiveness. So it really emphasizes that community aspect.
That's awesome. Well, this next idea it kind of surprised me when I saw it come across. I wasn't exactly sure, just by the title alone, I wasn't sure what to make of it. But it's leading a digital pilgrimage. So tell us what this idea is and ideas on how you can implement it in the congregation.
So most people don't have a few $1,000s sitting around in the bank just to pick up and go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem or Wittenberg or Rome or pick another place where people tend to go for religious reasons. But with technology, we can get around some of that. And this is actually an idea that I saw that was just kind of, I had never thought about it before, but it's an amazing idea. There's, Google Earth. And in Google Earth, you can set up a quote unquote tour and of famous places. And so the one that I mentioned on there in the article is somebody has actually created the Via Dolorosa, which is the way of the cross, or the 12, the 12 stations of the cross, which obviously that's a little Roman Catholic or a lot Roman Catholic, but it was a great example of a way to do that. And so what people can do is, they have to download the Google Earth program, obviously, but you can say, okay, on this day it's stop 1, and here's information about stop 1, if it's the Hagia Sophia, or it's the Castle Church in Wittenberg. Why is this important in the history of Christianity? Or if it's something like, okay, here is Nazareth, right, and this is the not the birthplace, excuse me. This is where Jesus spent a part of his childhood and things like that. So there's a lot of leeway on that. The other way to do it, and I mentioned this just really in passing, is you could do kind of a more artistic way. In other words, kind of a quote unquote spiritual pilgrimage. There's a lot of great historic artwork done by Christians throughout history of kind of showing the different events in Jesus' life and different events in famous Christians' life or people from the Bible. And you can kind of help people just see in a very visual way what it means that Christ died on the cross, and bring that in a level or a way that they maybe have not experienced or thought of before. When we read things, reading is important, and Luther talks about meditating on the word, and that's important. But words can paint an image, but sometimes seeing the image itself. So I think of the descent from the cross. It's a very powerful image, and you just read, Jesus died, but when you see the painting, the descent from the cross, and you see Jesus and his body color is just washed out because it's a corpse, right? And the people that are taking him down, you can obviously tell there's more color to their flesh, and it hits you right in your gut of what it kind of means for Jesus to have died. Whereas when you just read the words, you don't necessarily get that visual impact.
Right.
And so there's a couple ways to do this, obviously, but that one obviously takes a lot more planning. Than some of the others.
The way technology has changed, I mean, like you said, most people can't go overseas and take that trip. But, you put on your Google Cardboard and you can pretty much feel like you're there and experience that. Yeah. So great.
Yeah, so especially if people have the VR goggles. I wasn't even thinking about that. I was thinking,
just the
80-year-old Grandma Schmidt who just broke her hip might not want to go walk around Jerusalem.
Probably not. Well, this next one is a related idea to last year, and you posted having a daily prayer. This is a little bit different in that it's having a daily call to prayer. So can you explain the difference to that and how this actually lends itself to a different kind of prayer?
So having a daily prayer would be posting a prayer for people to pray. Whereas having a daily call to prayer is you're posting out there, and you want to make sure it's kind of the same time every day so you can schedule your posts. You're calling people to pray, to take time to pray. And this can be through a tweet, Tumblr, Facebook, kind of how you want to do it. And there's a couple ways to do this. You can put out a request for prayers, and then so in the daily call to prayer, you say, these are the prayer requests that we have, or as people respond to them, respond to that request for prayers. As your members check in, or the people that follow your page check in, they can see those responses and they can pray for those things. The other way to do it is to put out, okay, this is our daily call to prayer, and when you pray, we're going to be praying for all our households this Lent. And so you've already divided up the households into 40 or 46, depending if you're doing Sundays or not. And so you sit there and say, today we are praying for like the Adams, Allen, Applehans, and Barr families, right? And so you don't want to necessarily list individuals because you have some privacy concerns there. Whereas a household name, that could be almost, unless you have like 100 people in your community, that could be pretty much anybody. You're not necessarily giving away personal information there. And doing this, you're making a big request of people, but it's also really impactful. I was in the Michigan district for 3 years, and the Michigan district, their office staff, the district staff does something pretty nice that all the district staffs do, where they pray through the pastors or all the church workers and the congregations in the district. But one thing that the district staff did in Michigan was, you get a postcard in the mail the week of that they prayed for you, and it just kind of that emotional uplifting feeling of knowing that somebody who's out of sight and out of mind is praying for you is pretty big. And so having your members, because you can have complete strangers responding to these calls of prayer. So having your members sitting there saying, I am praying for you, it can be very impactful. And it's also a way to, especially in Lent, in the lead up to Easter, kind of have a lead on visitors, and in business terms, you might call them sales leads or leads on sales, something like that. But it gives you kind of points of contact with people in your community that you wouldn't have otherwise, and a way to reach out for them and say, being a Christian is about caring for other people, it is about praying for other people. And how can we, in the name of Christ, express God's love to you today? And this is a way to do it.
Well, and again, if you're doing it in that way, it's not a showy prayer like like the Pharisees, and praying out loud in the temple. No, it's that call to prayer to say, just keep them in mind, and building that sense of community. I think that's a great idea. And you mentioned what the Michigan district is doing. I follow them on Facebook, and I pray for churches in Michigan that I probably wouldn't have had I not seen that post. And it's just a great reminder. So. Before we get into this last one, I do want to invite our live viewers that if you would like to ask a question on here or share what you're doing for Lent this year on social media, please go ahead and put that in the chat box. We'll be happy to look at those and either answer questions or just get some additional ideas for Lent this year. So the last the last idea for Lent that Daniel, you put together is, this is the one that you've got a lot of details on, and I really liked it. It's telling stories of faith. And I appreciate you going into that level of detail on a couple different stories. I was reading through them, and I was like, I need to learn the rest of that story on there. But tell us a little bit about how you might tell stories of faith in a different way on social media this Lent.
Yeah. So, one of the things about all these ideas that was maybe different from last year is that a lot of these ideas can interact with one another or be used with each other. So the telling stories of faith, you can do that through video, or you can do that through a post. And what I mean by this is that there's 2,000 years of Christians, and there's, if you just want to define Christians as you know those who believed in Christ after Christ came, but there's thousands of years of the stories of believers. So Moses, obviously waiting for God's Messiah to come. I'd count Moses as a Christian. What this is, so everybody, they know about Moses, they know about David, they know about Daniel, but what about other people? So even lesser known characters in the Bible, or what about the people that came after the apostles, right? When the Christian church was going through times of persecution, how did Christians express their faith, and why was it that the church grew? Well, because of what these people were doing. And so there's just tons of stories there. And then there's not even just that, but there's also stories within your individual members at your individual congregations. So, James got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 10 years ago, and he went through like 3 years of really intensive chemotherapy, and praise be to God, he was healed and he came through it. But this would be a great time to sit down with him and say, look, could you kind of tell us how your faith affected you going through this, and how your reliance on God, even in this time where you were definitely walking through the valley of the shadow of death, carried you through this very hard time where you thought you might have to be saying goodbye to your family, and your family thought that they might have to be saying goodbye to you. And you can do that as a written post, or you can do that as like a video interview, obviously. But there's just tons and tons of stories out there, and you can just Google some of these stories. I mean, some of these I just pulled off from experience that I had known. I'd gone to Russia in my seminary. It was my cross-cultural module, and as part of that, we ate dinner with these two old, they were like in their 80s Russian women. And one of the stories that they told us that night was how when the Soviets came into power, it was illegal to be a Christian, and their village was primarily Lutheran. They were still worshiping. And so one day the KGB literally came into town, loaded every Christian up on a train, shipped them off in Siberia, dropped them off at basically in spring, and said, we'll be back next year. No food, no clothing, no axes. It's basically out in the middle of the wilderness of Siberia. Like half the town died. And yet these women are still very devout Lutherans today. And so how their faith kind of got through them. Or Saint Ignatius on his way to Rome, where he would be martyred, and in his letter to the Christians in Rome, basically saying, look, I don't.
Oh, we seem to have lost audio. I'm not sure what happened there. Well, we're going to try to get Daniel's audio back on. I don't know if a plug got pulled or what. Oh. We got some feedback there, Daniel.
Oh, sorry. I unplugged and plugged back in my headphones just to see if that would help.
All right, good. I think we're back. Let's try that. So.
Okay.
All right. That sounds.
Yeah. So Saint Ignatius, one of the Christian martyrs, writes this letter to Christians in Rome on his way to where he knows he's going to be killed for his faith, saying, look, don't try to get a pardon for me or whatever. It's actually a better witness for me to go and do this thing. And that's a very powerful letter, very powerful story. And there's just tons of those. And so it's one of the ways to reach people somewhat where they're at, because people get in this mindset of, when I'm going through difficult things, I need to keep it private, I need to keep it personal, and I'm the only one going through this. And that's not true. The church is a community. It's a community of care and support for one another when people are going through difficult times. And so one of the ways to strengthen people's faith is to say, hey, look, here are people that have gone through really terrible, bad things, and this is how their faith has helped them. And so, one, you're not alone, and two, if you're not going through a terrible thing right now, why is it that we look to the saints? We look to the saints because of the witness of their faith, right? We don't pray to the saints. We're Lutherans, obviously, but that amazing, powerful witness of their faith, and this is a way to highlight some of that besides just All Saints Day.
Well, and I love the idea of comparing people in your church today and showing that with people in the last 100 years, and even all the way back to the early Christian church and New Testament, Old Testament. We've been going through the Old Testament at my congregation, and last week it was Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and how much of a connection we can have to them who stood up for their faith under heavy persecution. And you're thinking about teenagers and peer pressure and all that. There's a direct tie in there, and that's
Yep.
back in the Old Testament. So
Yep.
showing that community of believers, I love that idea.
There's
Well,
nothing new under the sun, as Ecclesiastes tells us.
exactly. Well, we're just about out of time, and I don't think we've got any questions in there in the queue. So, my last question for you is: as we look at these ideas, so we had a bunch last year, we've got 5 more this year. If a church should only do one thing for on social media for Lent and leading up to Easter, what would you suggest that be?
Well, I like to say, if you're going to do nothing, at least put your services online. That's the one thing. Just because it gets the message out there. And not even necessarily the Lent services, although that's very easy to do. Easter services, because Easter and Christmas are when people, we call them seeing ears for a reason. It's when people kind of come to church. And so get it online because your people can share it with people that they know, their friends, their neighbors, people that said, hey, we haven't been to church in a few years, and Easter's coming up, and we'd really like to go to a church. And your friend gets up there and say, oh yeah, you should come to my church, and here's the time. But not only that, I'll share it with you on Facebook or send it to you on Twitter or something else, just so that they have that reminder. It's also, if you make a post like that, and especially with Facebook now, it's a little bit smarter when you sit there and say, our Easter service is such and such time on such and such date. Facebook will say, do you want to make an event? And that's great, because the next step I would say is to make an event for an individual service on Easter, because we have 3 services on a weekend. And Easter's no different. We have Easter Vigil Saturday night, and we have an 8 a.m. and we have a 10:30 a.m. on Sunday morning. And so we can put kind of all that out there. But if we want to help our members invite people to church, well, you don't want to just say, hey, come to me with church on Easter, and this is the church I go to. And then the non-members have to figure out, okay, do they go to 10:30? Do they go to 8 o'clock? Do they go to Easter sunrise service? Which one? So an individual service individual event for a service, it's easier to share and invite people to that. It's also easier to advertise. And if you create a post on social media, Facebook is actually really aggressive with this, saying, hey, do you want to boost this post? In other words, do you want to advertise this post? And this is why I say Easter, because we tend to advertise our Christmas and Easter services. We don't have a huge advertising budget. We're not a mega church here, but it doesn't cost a lot of money. And there are certain groups of people demographics that are really prime targets for advertising. What I mean by that is, Facebook will allow you to target somebody who's recently gone through a divorce or recently moved, and if I remember correctly, even potentially had a recent death in the family. And so those are 3 major life events, 3 of the 5, I think, of the list. I can't remember that far back into my undergrad psychology of major life events. But 3 life events where people tend to turn to faith. They moved. Okay, so I'm looking for a church. divorce, okay, hurting, looking for healing, death in the family, hurting, looking for healing, looking for answers. And so you can tailor your advertisements to that, your post to that, but you have to have that original post kind of so to do, and you can tailor your messages. What I mean by that is, so last year for Easter we had an ad set on Facebook that was targeted for people who had recently gone through a divorce, and it was just really simple. It was basically, find hope, or find healing this Easter, and it was, I had our service time, and, and they were set up for we had our individual services, and so we had one ad set for the 8 o'clock service and one ad set for the 10:30 service. Um, so it doesn't cost. It's cheaper than advertising on the radio. It can be very, very specific, but it gets the information out there. So at the very least, put your service times on Facebook or on Twitter, whatever social media your church has. Get it on the website too.
Absolutely.
And then if you need to, tag somebody in your conversation, say, or your congregation, say, hey, look, do you know anything about Facebook, and can you help us kind of come up with an ad here? But it's a way to reach people literally where they're at without having to spend a lot of money like it would take to do a billboard or a radio ad or a TV ad.
Well, and it's so much more targeted, like you said. You can really pick who you're going after down to some pretty extreme level of detail. So, great. Well, thank you so much for these ideas. Thank you for being live with me today. I always enjoy talking with you, and always enjoy reading your posts. So thank you for doing that, and please keep it up. We'll have some more from you coming up in the next month and two. So thank you again for tuning live to us today. We'll be back next week with another great topic. But for now, have a great week.
Thanks, guys.